When I was younger, I remember some audiophiles telling me, Sean, you don't have a real stereo system unless half the components in your rig can break your back. Well, look at me now. Anyways, guys, today I'm here to talk to you about these big bad boys from Klipsch, the fourth generation of the Cornwall. Now, I have a lot to go over with you guys, so let's get right to it. Alright, so here it is, the fourth generation of the Cornwall. And you know what's crazy, guys? The original Cornwall was introduced in 1959. That makes this speaker's lineage 60 years in age, which pretty much puts it right in line with my parents, which is kind of crazy to me. Anyways, what we're going to do for this section of the video is we're going to go over what you get with the fourth generation of the Cornwall. And let's start off by noting the obvious, which is its size. This speaker is very big. It weighs 100 pounds apiece and is over 2 feet in width, meaning that you need some space in order to accommodate them. And you also need some extra money in your bank account because they are not cheap. They retail for $6,000 a pair, and that's what happens when you get something that's this big, that's designed and made in the United States. So now let's take a closer look at the veneer because I really like the walnut that comes standard with the Cornwall. It has some good texture to it, and plus it feels so smooth to the touch. Down here we're going to have our grills. Now they're not made of a cloth material because Klipsch has found that cloth doesn't really hold up well over time. Instead, it's made with this fiber material that's supposed to be a lot stronger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the grill, which is magnetic, and then we're going to take a look at the drivers. Alright, the grill is off, the Cornwall is au natural, so now it's time to take a closer look at what you get with this speaker. Now to be clear, removing the grill is not difficult. It's just removing the grill with one hand while holding the camera with the other is a little bit challenging, hence the reason for the cut. Anyways, on to the Cornwall IV. What you get with this speaker is a big ass three-way front ported design. It's all about using low mass drivers that can move a lot of air, and in Klipsch's own words, if it moves, it distorts. Anyways, on to the drivers themselves. To handle the high frequencies, we have a 1-inch titanium dome tweeter housed inside this little Tratrix horn. Think of it as an upgraded version over what you get with the Forte 3. There have been a number of improvements to the design to include a new phase plug, which is going to help give this horn a perfect 90-degree coverage pattern. At around 5,000 or so hertz, it's going to cross over to this much larger mid-range horn. This actually comes from one of Klipsch's commercial products, and inside that horn you're going to find a 1 3/4-inch polyimide driver that's going to be used for its heat-resistant and lightweight properties. Some of you are going to notice these flares on the horn, and what Klipsch refers to these as are mumps, and this helps to control the dispersion pattern down to the lowest frequencies, which allows Klipsch to use all of the horn. At around 6 or 700 or so hertz, it's going to cross over to this big guy, a huge 15-inch woofer that comes directly from the Cornwall 3. Hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We have our corrugated surround, the lightweight paper material, and beneath that we are going to have 3 ports. So these are horn ports, and Klipsch found that horns are the best way to get air in and out of the cabinet. Now it looks like something that they just came up with, but believe it or not, head engineer Roy Delgado came up with this design over 10 years ago. In fact, they've been using them in commercial products for a while, most recently the Klipsch Reference Premier, and according to Roy, he got this one for free. When they hooked up these ports to Cornwall, they worked perfectly well, so they didn't have to go through retooling a new port, which is kind of cool for them. Anyways, guys, that's going to be it for our Cornwall. So now let's finally talk about how they sound. Alright, so now it's time to talk about performance. And before I go over the different sound characteristics of the Cornwall IV, I first need to answer a question that so many of you have asked already, which is how these speakers stack up to the Forte 3s, and most importantly, if I think they're worth the extra $2,000. And in my humble opinion, the answer is yes, absolutely. So long as you have extra room in your living space to accommodate these speakers, and quite frankly, extra money in your bank account, I see no reason why you wouldn't go with the Cornwall 4s, because what you're getting is a bigger, better performance over the Forte 3. So if you listen to the Forte 3 and you think, wow, I really like that, I just wish there was more of it, That's exactly what you're going to get out of the Cornwall 4. Now, don't get me wrong, I could see scenarios to where people would prefer the sound of the Forte 3. If you're in a smaller room or if you're really sensitive to the sound of a horn, the Forte 3 may be the better way to go. But if that's not you, and especially if you're in a larger room, then yeah, the Cornwall is going to be it. And that leads me to how they sound. So when it comes to the performance of the Cornwall 4, I'm reminded of the Latin phrase res ipsa loquitur, which means sometimes the thing just speaks for itself. So when you look at the Cornwall 4, what you see is what you get. It's almost like an American stereotype. It's big, it's wide, it's in your face, it's forward sounding. It might as well be eating fast food, drinking beer, and shooting guns. In fact, the sound is a lot like a classic V8 American muscle car, which isn't about refinement or precision. Instead, it's about reproducing the sensation of a live musical event right there in your living space. So now let's talk about the character and the overall different elements of his presentation. So when it comes to its overall character, what you're going to get out of the Cornwall is a presentation that's going to be lively. This isn't going to be some laid back sounding speaker. The top end is going to have a forward character to it. The mid-range is going to be huge. It's going to project in a forward way. The bass is going to have this warm, punchy sound to it. And again, it's all about making it sound like the performers are only a few feet from your listening position. Now, the interesting thing about the character, though, is that you can tune it to taste. Let me explain what I mean. If you like that classic Klipsch sound, something with a bright top end and a really forward-sounding mid-range, that punchy and strong bass, all you need to do is point the speaker directly towards you, take off the grill, and that's exactly what you're going to get. But if you like a sound that's smoother on top, more balanced, and just a little bit more refined, great. All you have to do is point the speaker directly out into the room, leave the grill on, and that's exactly what you're going to get. So you have some flexibility in terms of tuning the sound to taste. Now let's go into detail by talking about the treble. So the treble is interesting because yes, on one hand it is lively, it is forward, but it's not over the top with it. This isn't a speaker that's trying to beat you over the head with top end detail. And I think that was a wise move by Klipsch because let's face it, this is a titanium dome tweeter housed inside of a horn. Things can get very bright very quickly. So what you end up with is a speaker that still has all the things that audiophiles are looking for at $6,000. Airiness, spaciousness, good detail, good separation with that detail, good tone. It has all of that, but it's not going to be so aggressive that you can't listen to real world music through these speakers. And I think that's important because most of the people I know who own Cornwalls listen to real world music most of the time. So the only compromise with that is that it's not going to give you the most nuanced and refined sounding top end. But I think for most people, that's absolutely worth it. So now let's talk about the mid-range. So the mid-range, in my opinion, is the star of the show. It projects with this huge sense of scale. There's a lot of depth to it. It's very quick and immediate with this response. But what I didn't expect out of the mid-range was really good tone. This speaker actually is really good when it comes to tonal accuracy, whether it's woodwinds, whether it's piano, and especially the human voice. Not only does it deliver a good sense of scale, in fact, one would argue maybe a hyper sense of scale, I love the balance. The vocals neither sound too chesty nor too nasally. In fact, the only time I'd say they sound too nasally is if you point the speaker directly at you. But otherwise, the Cornwall has really good tone. And of course, for somebody who likes it when a speaker can play complex music and can make it sound like the individual elements within the presentation have their own sense of space, you're going to love the Cornwall. Now, let's talk about the bass. So the bass is going to be warm and punchy sounding. Now, if you place it next to a wall, it's going to have this thick character. Now, don't get me wrong, you can still track difficult bass lines through the Cornwall, even near the wall without any kind of issues. But obviously, as soon as you take it away from a wall boundary, that's when the bass is going to quicken up. But still, it's going to be more of a quality over quantity thing because if you're the kind of person who listens to EDM or reggae or hip hop and you want that thunderous, visceral bass, you're not necessarily going to get that out of the Cornwall. Instead, it's a speaker that's more about being able to play loud, cleanly, versus giving you that a sense of rumble. So it's just something that you need to be aware of. Now, let's talk about dynamic output. Guys, this speaker is wonderful in that regard. If you listen to classical music with a lot of crescendos, you're going to love how much air this speaker can move. So, I mean, it is really, really good in that regard. Next, when it comes to imaging, what you experience out of this speaker is going to hinge largely on setup. So if you have them pointed directly towards you, you're going to get wonderful focus and scale right in between the speakers, but you're going to sacrifice a bit of that holographic soundstage. However, when you point the speakers directly out into the room, that's when you're going to get your holographic sound soundstage. You're still going to have good focus in between the speakers, but it's not going to be quite as rock solid as it is when you have them pointed directly at you. So this is just something that you need to experiment with. Next, let's talk about equipment matching. So one of the benefits of horn speakers is that they can sound really good at low volumes, and they don't need a lot of power due to their efficiency. So you can get away with a 2 to 3 watt SET amplifier provided you're in a smaller space and you listen at moderate volumes. However, I think for most people, a good 20 to 50 watt amplifier is where you want to be with these. Some people are going to ask whether they sound better with tubes or solid state. I'd say that they sound great with both topologies. In my opinion, I like them better with tubes just because I feel like it gives the sound just a little bit more body. It rounds off the top end a little bit, but that's just me. Solid state sounds fine. And even though these speakers are very revealing of upstream components, just like the Forte 3s, also like the Forte 3s, you don't need to use high-end components with them. In fact, something like the Iotavx SA3 is a great tonal match for them, even at an affordable price point. But of course, if you can feed them better electronics, you will get better sound. And lastly, let's talk about the music listening experience. So one of the marks of excellence for me is whenever I get in a pair of speakers to where I feel comfortable reaching into my music collection and grabbing anything that I'm in the mood to listen to, knowing that I'm going to be in for a good time. So when I set the Cornwalls up to my taste, that's exactly what I get. And because they're full range, because they're very efficient and dynamic, I know that no matter what music I pick, again, it's going to sound wonderful. It's going to sound engaging. And that's, again, excuse me, I'm losing it towards the end here. That's what these speakers are all about. But still, they're not going to be for everybody. So let's reinforce some of those compromises now. So what happens when you take a big horn-loaded speaker and you put it in a real-world environment? The answer is the first common sense caveat that I have for you guys, which is you're going to get a unique presentation. And it's something that you need to hear in person in order to appreciate whether or not it's going to make you happy over the long haul. Now let's talk about my second common sense caveat, which is the fact that these are big speakers. And unsurprisingly, they're going to sound best when you can give them just a little bit of room to breathe. Now don't get me wrong, I do have them in a very intimate space right now. My room is 13 by 9. I sit roughly 6 feet away from them. And while I get great sound out of these speakers in this room, it's clear that they could sound even better if I had just a little bit more room to work with. And then lastly, let's talk about the pros and cons of flexibility, because as I mentioned earlier, you can tune the sound of these speakers just by positioning them within a room, or more specifically, pointing them towards you or pointing them directly out into the space or somewhere in between. Now, a lot of people are going to like that flexibility, but some of you out there are going to want more of a drop and plop solution. You just don't want to mess with that. And if that's you, then that's going to be a big problem, because that's going to be a huge part of the Cornwall 4 experience, is finding that right location and that right tonal balance for your taste. Anyways, that's going to be it for the caveat. So now let's wrap this thing up. Okay, so to wrap this up, I'm going to go handheld. Now, I know that some of you are not going to be happy about the fact that there is no comparison in this video between the Cornwall 3 and the Cornwall 4. And the reason being is I have no meaningful experience with the third generation of the Cornwall, so all I can do is tell you about my impressions of the Cornwall 4s as is. And as it stands, I would say that they are an excellent solution for somebody who's looking for a pair of speakers that do a great job of making it sound like there's a live performance taking place right there in your room. I'm talking about the kind of person who wants to just feel like they can reach out and touch the performers. Somebody who values detail and a big dynamic sound, something that has real scale to it, something that you can rock out to, yet at the same time listen at very soft volumes and feel like you're still getting a full presentation. If that's you, then you really need to check out the Cornwall 4s, especially if you can afford them. Now, subjectively speaking, I do like the speakers. Yes, the mid-range will beam at you if you have them configured as is, but if you point them directly out into the room, that becomes mitigated, and what you're left with is a very well-balanced speaker in terms of driver integration, and yeah, something that has that lively, unique presentation that I can't think of in terms of any other company offering the same exact presentation for this kind of money. The Cornwalls are definitely very unique. And then, of course, there's going to be the fact that this is the kind of speaker that you can own for a very long time. In fact, for a lot of people, this is going to be an end game. The kind of product that you use for decades on end, something that your kids are going to associate with you. In fact, maybe you'll even pass it on to your kids, or maybe not. Maybe they can get their own. But that's what you're dealing with here, is a very high quality loudspeaker that'll make it sound like there's a performance taking place right there in your room. It's definitely worth checking out. Anyways, guys, that's just going to be my take on the Cornwall 4. As always, thanks for watching, and until next time, peace. Okay, since I don't have any other $6,000 speakers to compare the Cornwalls to right now, what I'm going to do for the bonus section is go over a few things that you may find interesting. First, I want to just show you all the difference in scale between the Forte 3 and the Cornwall, because now is a great opportunity to do that. And as you guys can tell, there is a huge size difference. I also want to highlight the difference between the walnut veneer and the distressed oak. I had to think about it for a second. Granted, the lighting is trash, but hopefully this will give you at least an approximation of how the two veneers compare. And lastly, let's go all the way down here and comment on this, because I'm sure some people are going to talk about it, which are these little wooden circles that I have under the Cornwall. So what I'm doing is I'm angling the speaker up just a little bit to help out its vertical dispersion, because in this tiny room, I just like the sound when it's just a little higher than where the equipment rack is right now. So that's all that's going on. This isn't something that you need to do in order to get great sound, but if you're in a small room like mine, then you may find that this helps with vertical dispersion just a little bit. Anyways, guys, okay, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and until next time, peace.